The court is ready to deliver its verdict.
So, this is how it ends.
Your Honor, if you convict this man today, the real criminal walks free.
Who is that?
Chef, Chinedu, you're too late. No one will believe you. The evidence already has.
Welcome to Story with Black, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.
The judge had already picked up the gavel. The verdict was seconds away. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pens hovering over notebooks, cameras aimed and ready. Prosecutors exchanged confident smiles, the kind of smiles that only came when a case was already won. Across the courtroom, Korea's most feared Mafia boss sat still, his hands folded on the table in front of him. He closed his eyes and accepted that his empire and maybe his life were about to end. Then the courtroom doors swung open with a sound that made every head turn. A tall black man in an expensive suit walked inside, carrying nothing but a weathered leather briefcase. He did not rush. He did not panic. He walked straight to the center of the courtroom, looked directly at the judge and spoke in a calm, steady voice. Your Honor, if you convict this man today, the real criminal will walk free. The entire courtroom fell silent. Somewhere near the back, a reporter's pen froze mid-sentence. Only one person in that room recognized the stranger's face. The old Mafia boss. 15 years earlier, he had pulled a starving Nigerian boy back from the edge of death on a rainy dock in Busan. No one in that courtroom knew that the frightened child he once saved had spent 15 years quietly preparing to save him in return, and no one yet understood that the next few hours would rewrite everything they thought they knew about this case. 15 years before that morning, Han Jae-min walked along the edge of Busan harbor late on a rainy night. He had just finished a secret meeting, the kind of meeting men like him never spoke about, not even to the people closest to them. Water dripped from the shipping containers stacked along the docks, and the smell of salt and diesel hung heavy in the air. As he walked toward his car, he heard something strange, a soft scraping sound coming from behind a row of abandoned containers. He stopped walking. He listened again. Someone was digging through discarded food. Curiosity pulled him toward the sound instead of away from it, and what he found stopped him cold. A skinny 10-year-old boy crouched in the dark, his clothes torn, his body covered in bruises, his hands shaking as he searched through garbage for something to eat. The boy's name was Chinedu Okafor, and he had been trafficked out of Nigeria through a fake overseas scholarship program before escaping the men who held him captive somewhere near the harbor. Han knelt down slowly, careful not to frighten him further, and offered the boy money. The boy shook his head and backed away against the container wall. I don't need money, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. I just need food. Before Han could respond, 3 armed men stepped out of the shadows between the containers, searching for the child who had slipped away from them hours earlier. Han moved faster than any of them expected. Within moments, all 3 men were on the wet concrete, and the boy was still standing, still breathing, still alive. Han carried Chinedu to one of his private safe houses that same night, wrapping his own coat around the shivering child. A doctor arrived before sunrise and discovered severe malnutrition, untreated wounds along the boy's arms and back, and the kind of fear that does not disappear with medicine or bandages. Weeks passed as the boy slowly healed, flinching at every sudden sound, refusing to sleep unless a light stayed on in the hallway. When he was strong enough to speak clearly, Han offered to place him in a government orphanage, believing it was the responsible thing to do for a child with no family left in the country. Chinedu refused. He looked up at the man who had saved his life and said, I've already lost one family. Something in those simple words changed Han's mind in an instant, the way a single sentence sometimes changes the direction of an entire life. Instead of sending the boy away, he filed the papers to legally adopt him. A man feared across an entire criminal underworld suddenly found himself learning how to comfort a child who woke up screaming from nightmares, how to sit through school meetings with teachers who had no idea who he really was, how to be something he had never once tried to be before. A father. Growing up inside Han's mansion, Chinedu never behaved like the people around him. Servants lowered their eyes when Han walked past. Bodyguards obeyed without question, moving out of rooms the moment Han entered them. Business partners avoided looking directly at him during meetings, as if eye contact alone might cost them something. Only Chinedu asked questions. He noticed the hidden rooms behind bookshelves that no one ever explained. He noticed the encrypted computers in the East Wing that stayed locked even to the household staff. He noticed men arriving late at night in cars with no license plates and leaving again before the sun rose. At 12 years old, he sat across from Han at dinner one evening and said something that made the old boss put down his chopsticks and go very still. "One day your biggest enemy won't be outside this house. It'll already be inside it." Han laughed it off as a child's overactive imagination, the kind of thing children say after watching too many films. He had no idea in that quiet dining room how right the boy would turn out to be. As Chinidu grew older, Han noticed how sharp his mind truly was, and he hired the best teachers money could find, flying them in from 3 different continents. The boy studied economics, cybersecurity, international law, and forensic accounting, subjects most children his age had never even heard of, let alone mastered before they turned 16. Unlike the men who worked for Han, Chinidu believed that truth was stronger than fear, and he said so often at dinners where no one else dared speak so plainly. He told Han again and again that powerful men should still answer to the law, that no empire built on secrecy and silence could stand forever no matter how many guards stood at its gates. Han never admitted it out loud, not once, but watching the boy grow into someone so different from himself filled him with a quiet, unfamiliar pride that he did not know what to do with. Han's closest advisor was a man named Director Min, soft-spoken and endlessly respectful, the kind of man everyone in the household trusted without a second thought. He had been at Han's side for over 20 years, through wars with rival families, through police raids, through betrayals that had cost other men their lives. Everyone trusted him completely. Everyone except Chinidu. He noticed that Director Min never once disagreed with Han, not on a single decision, not in all the years he had watched him sit quietly in the corner of every meeting. He noticed that Min always seemed to have answers ready before anyone had even finished asking the question, as if he already knew where every conversation was headed. Chinidu warned Han more than once that blind loyalty could be hiding something far more dangerous than betrayal ever announced itself to be. Han refused to believe that the man who had stood beside him through every war, every rival, every close call, could ever turn against him now, after 20 years of unbroken trust. At 18, Chinidu earned admission to study forensic accounting and international criminal law in London, a letter that arrived on a quiet Tuesday and changed the shape of both their lives. On the night before his flight, Han stood with him at the airport gate and said quietly, almost like a warning, "Forget this life. Build a better one." Chinidu looked at the man who had saved him from starving to death on a Busan dock 8 years earlier and made a promise he intended to keep no matter how long it took. "If you ever need me, I'll come back." Neither of them knew, as they said goodbye that night under the fluorescent airport lights, whether they would ever stand in the same room again. The moment Chinidu boarded that plane, Director Min began the final stage of a plan he had been building in silence for years, maybe even decades, waiting patiently for the one obstacle in the house to finally leave. Billions of won vanished through a web of shell corporations scattered across 3 countries, each one registered under names that led nowhere real. Financial records were quietly altered, one line at a time, so slowly that no one noticed the pattern forming until it was already far too late to stop it. Han's signature was forged onto documents he had never seen, copied so precisely that even his own lawyers would later struggle to tell the difference. Government investigators, following a trail laid perfectly for them by a man who understood exactly how investigators think, walked straight into the story Director Min had written for them. One by one, the men who had sworn loyalty to Han began to lose faith in him, convinced by evidence that looked flawless because it had been designed, piece by piece, to look that way. The empire Han had spent 30 years building started collapsing from a wow no one could see, because it was coming from inside his own house, exactly as a 12-year-old boy had once warned him at a quiet dinner table. Authorities arrested Han Jae-min on a gray morning outside his own front gate, cameras flashing as officers led him away in handcuffs while neighbors watched from behind their curtains. He was charged with money laundering, organized crime, corruption, and financial fraud, charges backed by mountains of paperwork that seemed impossible to argue against no matter which angle his lawyers tried. International media declared his conviction inevitable before the trial had even started, running headlines that had already decided his fate. Even his own lawyers, sitting in private meetings with the case files spread across the table late into the night, admitted quietly that there might be nothing left to save him. Meanwhile, in a quiet office far from the courtroom, Director Min prepared to inherit everything Han had built, the moment the prison doors closed behind the man he had once called his oldest friend. What no one in that courtroom knew was that Chinidu had spent every one of those 15 years preparing for a moment he prayed would never come, even while he built a career, earned degrees, and made a name for himself far from Korea. Working alongside international investigators, forensic accountants, and cybercrime specialists in London and beyond, he had quietly built a case of his own, tracing hidden bank accounts scattered across a dozen countries most people could not find on a map. He traced forged signatures back to the exact machines that created them. He traced encrypted transactions through shell companies buried under layers of false ownership designed to confuse anyone who came looking. Every single thread he pulled, no matter how small, led back to the same man, Director Min. But Chinedu waited, even when it hurt to wait, even when news of his father's arrest reached him in London and every instinct told him to fly home immediately. He knew that revealing what he had found too early would only give the real criminal time to disappear into one of the dozen countries where his money already waited, and he had promised himself that when the moment finally came, there would be nowhere left for Director Min to run. That moment arrived the instant the courtroom doors swung open, seconds before a verdict that would have destroyed an innocent man forever in front of the entire country. No one recognized the tall stranger walking toward the front of the room. Han recognized him instantly, the way a parent always recognizes a child no matter how many years have passed or how much they have grown. Their eyes met for the first time in 15 years, and for a moment, the feared Mafia boss looked less like a criminal and more like a father seeing his son come home from a war he never knew he was fighting. Chinedu requested permission to join the defense, laying his credentials on the judge's bench: international law, forensic accounting, a decade and a half of preparation compressed into a single folder. The judge reviewed the documents slowly, then granted the request. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the trial changed direction in front of their eyes, and reporters in the back row began typing faster than they had all morning. For the next several hours, Chinedu dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece, calm and precise, never raising his voice once, never losing his composure even as the room around him grew tense. Financial experts confirmed that the signatures on the forged documents did not match Han's true handwriting under close examination. Cyber specialists recovered deleted files that had been erased years earlier, files that led straight back to a private server registered under Director Min's name. International banking officials testified about shell companies secretly owned by Min long before Han was ever placed under investigation. One witness after another confirmed what Chinedu had spent 15 years proving, and slowly the courtroom began to understand that they had been chasing the wrong man from the very beginning, that the real architect of this crime had been sitting in the gallery the entire time. Director Min could not stay silent as his carefully built lie collapsed in front of him, piece by piece, in front of cameras broadcasting to the entire country. He rose from his seat, his voice shaking with anger he could no longer control, and in his fury he revealed a detail about the case that only the true mastermind could have known, a detail that sealed his fate the moment it left his mouth. Officers began moving toward him from both sides of the gallery. In a moment of pure desperation, he reached beneath his jacket and pulled out a hidden weapon, and several people in the courtroom screamed and dropped to the floor. Han rushed forward without thinking, ready to place himself between the danger and the son he had raised. But Chinedu stepped in front of his father first, his hands raised, his voice steady despite the gun pointed toward them both. "No, father. Not with violence. Today the law finishes what fear never could." Security officers closed in and disarmed Director Min before anyone in that courtroom was harmed, though the silence that followed felt heavier than any gunshot could have, and it took several long seconds before anyone in the room remembered to breathe. During the recess that followed, Han sat across from Chinedu in a small side room, still shaken, his hands trembling slightly around a paper cup of untouched water, and asked the question that had been sitting in his chest for 15 years. Why had he spent so long preparing for a single day in a courtroom, when he could have built any life he wanted, far away from all of this? Chinedu allowed himself a small, tired smile, the first real smile anyone had seen from him all day. Because 15 years ago, you saved a frightened Nigerian boy everyone else had already forgotten. You gave me food, a home, and a future I never thought I'd have. I couldn't repay that kind of debt with money. I could only repay it by saving your life. For the first time in decades, the man feared by an entire criminal underworld could not find a single word to say, and he simply reached across the table and held his son's hand. Several days later, the court cleared Han of every fabricated charge, and the same reporters who had written his conviction as inevitable now scrambled to rewrite their headlines before the evening news. Director Min was convicted of fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted murder, and led away in handcuffs to face the same courtroom he had once believed would seal Han's downfall instead of his own. Investigators combing through his records afterward discovered that his network stretched far beyond the walls of that courtroom, reaching into banks, shipping companies, and shell corporations in countries no one had even begun to search yet. As Chinedu stood on the courthouse steps beside his father, free for the first time in months, an investigator approached and quietly handed him a single folder. Inside was a name neither of them had ever heard before, a name connected to the very same trafficking route that had once stolen a 10-year-old boy from Nigeria and left him starving behind a row of shipping containers on the edge of a Korean harbor. Chinedu stared down at that folder for a long moment, the wind pulling at the edges of the paper, then looked up at his father standing beside him in the afternoon light. He said nothing yet about what he had found inside it. He only knew that the debt he had spent 15 years repaying had just opened a door to something far larger than either of them had expected. And somewhere out there, right now, another frightened child was still waiting on a dock in the rain for someone to come looking.